Helen was a 23-year-old young woman living in a small town. Life had never been easy for her. From a young age, she faced challenges that most people wouldn't experience until much later in life. Her father passed away when she was still a child, and from that moment on, it had been just her and her mother struggling to get by. Her mother, now elderly and in poor health, relied entirely on Helen, which forced her to work tirelessly as a waitress in a small cafe downtown. The town they lived in wasn't big, but the pace of life there was exhausting. Every day, Helen woke up early, rushing to get to work, and only came home late at night. Even after a long day at the cafe, she still had to take care of her mother, manage the household, and try to keep the bills paid. The rent was always behind, the electricity bills kept piling up, and her mother's increasingly expensive medications weighed heavily on her wallet. Helen often felt like she was on the verge of a breakdown. There were days when she barely had the strength to get out of bed, but the thought of her sick mother pushed her to keep going. She often walked long distances to save the little money she had. It wasn't unusual to see her walking around town in worn-out clothes, carrying grocery bags, trying to stretch every cent of what little she could afford. Time moved slowly for Helen, and the hope of better days seemed to drift further and further away. Despite all the hardships, Helen never stopped dreaming. She remembered when she was a child and had dreamed of becoming a teacher. She loved the idea of teaching kids, of making a difference in their lives. But those dreams had been set aside when reality hit hard. Her present was far from the future she had once imagined for herself. Even so, there was a part of her heart that sometimes allowed itself to dream of a different life, one where she didn't have to worry about tomorrow. One night, after another exhausting shift at the cafe, something unexpected happened on her way home. The sky was cloudy, and a light rain had begun to fall, leaving the streets empty. Walking slowly, trying to avoid the puddles forming on the asphalt, she noticed something unusual. On a bench in a small park she passed by every day, there was a suitcase. It was a plain black suitcase, but it looked out of place. No one was around, and Helen hesitated for a moment. Her first thought was that someone might have forgotten it, but the rain was starting to pick up, and if the suitcase stayed there, it would soon be soaked. She stopped in front of the suitcase and looked around. Nothing, no one. The silence of the night was only broken by the soft sound of raindrops. Did someone leave it here by accident? She wondered. Curious, she bent down and, with some hesitation, opened the suitcase. What she saw made her eyes widen. Inside, there were stacks and stacks of money, neatly arranged bills piled high. Helen walked home with a heavy heart. She had made the right choice, but that didn't take away all the worries she carried. At the police station, the officers had been shocked by the amount of money, and one of them even joked that she should have kept at least a small portion, as if that was something normal to do. But Helen knew that no matter how difficult her life was, she couldn't live with the weight of having taken something that didn't belong to her. The values her mother had taught her were deeply rooted in her heart. Yet, the thought that her life could have changed in the blink of an eye made her question her decision. When she arrived home, her mother was already awake. Donna Claudia, a woman whose skin bore the marks of time, looked at Helen with a tired smile. "You're home early today, dear," she said, her voice weak but still full of affection. Helen smiled back, trying to hide the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Yeah, I just had to take care of a few things," she responded as she began preparing breakfast. Helen's days always started and ended the same way, caring for her mother, rushing off to work, and returning late at night. She knew she couldn't afford to stop. The bills kept coming, and her salary at the cafe was what kept the two of them afloat. As she made breakfast, Helen glanced out the kitchen window. Last night's rain had left puddles along the road, but now the sun was shining as if nothing had happened. To her, it felt like a reflection of her own life. The storm seemed endless, but every now and then, a ray of sunshine would break through to offer hope. However, Helen had no idea that the choice she made the previous night would bring a change far greater than she could imagine. The next afternoon, while she was working at the cafe, something unexpected happened. A well-dressed man walked in, looking around with an air of curiosity. Helen noticed him immediately, as this type of customer wasn't common at the cafe. He wore an expensive suit and seemed out of place in the simplicity of the cafe's atmosphere. Without paying too much attention, Helen approached him to take his order. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" she asked politely. The man, however, didn't seem interested in the menu. He looked directly at Helen and, with a mysterious smile, said, "You're Helen, right?" She was surprised that he knew her name but nodded. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" The man then took a card out of his pocket and handed it to her. "My name is Robert Vasconcelos. You did something very impressive yesterday. I'm the owner of the suitcase you found." Helen's heart began to race. She didn't expect the owner of the money to find her so quickly, let alone show up at her workplace. A mix of nervousness and curiosity washed over her. "Oh, I just did what was right," she replied, trying to keep her composure. Robert smiled again, this time more warmly. "I found this last night," she said, placing the suitcase on the counter. "I think someone lost it." The police officers looked at Helen with a mix of surprise and curiosity. They opened the suitcase and, like Helen, they were shocked by what they saw. "Do you have any idea how much money is in here?" one of the officers asked, still incredulous. Helen just nodded, but deep down, she knew she had made the right choice, even if the whole world thought she was crazy for returning that much money. The walk to Robert's office seemed shorter than usual, and before she realized it, she was standing in front of the imposing glass building. She took a deep breath before entering. As she passed through the revolving doors, a receptionist greeted her and led her to Robert's office. When she walked in, he was waiting for her with a welcoming smile. "I'm glad you came, Helen," he said, gesturing for her to sit down. She took a seat, still a bit nervous. "So what's this proposal?" she asked, trying to sound confident but feeling her heart race. Robert leaned forward slightly, looking her directly in the eyes. "I believe honesty is one of the most valuable qualities a person can have, and for that reason, I want to offer you something very special." Helen held her breath. She had no idea what was coming, and her anxiety was through the roof. "Not many people would have done what you did, Helen. That's why I'm here." Helen stood in silence, unsure of how to respond. Robert looked at her with a sense of admiration, but she didn't know what to expect from this conversation. Robert stepped a little closer to the counter and, in a more serious tone, said, "I want to thank you sincerely. That money was important, but what was even more important was your honesty. You could have kept all of it, and no one would have ever known. That shows the kind of person you truly are." Helen felt her face flush with warmth. She had never received such a compliment, and for a brief moment she felt proud of herself. But at the same time, she wasn't sure how to handle the situation. "I just thought someone out there might really need that money," she replied, modestly. Robert studied Helen for a few seconds, as if he was contemplating something. Then, he took another card from his pocket and handed it to her. "I'd like you to come to my office tomorrow. I have a proposal for you." Helen was taken aback. A proposal? What could that mean? She looked down at the card in her hand. The address was for a commercial building downtown, a place she had never been before. "A proposal?" she asked, confused. "Yes, something I think you'll like. Can we meet tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Robert asked with a kind smile. Helen didn't know what to think. She was skeptical, but there was something about Robert's demeanor that made her believe he was serious. "All right, I'll be there," she replied, still unsure of what to expect. Robert nodded and before leaving made one final remark. "And, Helen, thank you again. You did something rare and it won't be forgotten." With that, he left the cafe, leaving Helen alone with her thoughts. The rest of the day dragged on, and Helen found it nearly impossible to concentrate on her work. Her mind was fixated on the meeting she had the next day. What could Robert want with her? And what kind of proposal could it be? When she finally got home, Helen told her mother what had happened. Donna Claudia looked at her with a proud smile. "You've always been a good girl, Helen. I knew something good would come out of this," said Donna Claudia, her voice soft but filled with confidence. Helen, on the other hand, was still unsure. What if it was something she couldn't accept, or something she wasn't prepared to handle? But deep in her heart, a small flame of hope was starting to flicker. That night, Helen barely slept. The anticipation of what the next day would bring kept her awake, imagining all the possibilities. It was the first time in a long while that she felt this way, with the expectation that something good might finally happen in her life. When the sun rose the next morning, Helen was ready. She put on her best clothes, fixed her hair, and left the house with a mix of nerves and excitement. The walk to Robert's office seemed shorter than usual, and before she realized it, she was standing in front of the imposing glass building. She took a deep breath before entering. As she passed through the revolving doors, a receptionist greeted her and led her to Robert's office. When she walked in, he was waiting for her with a welcoming smile. "I'm glad you came, Helen," he said, gesturing for her to sit down. She took a seat, still a bit nervous. "So what's this proposal?" she asked, trying to sound confident but feeling her heart race. Robert leaned forward slightly, looking her directly in the eyes. "I believe honesty is one of the most valuable qualities a person can have, and for that reason, I want to offer you something very special." Helen held her breath. She had no idea what was coming, and her anxiety was through the roof. Helen's heart pounded as she waited for Robert to reveal his proposal. The atmosphere in the room felt thick, heavy with expectation. He watched her closely, as if carefully measuring each word he was about to say. After a brief silence, Robert leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Helen, you don't know me, but I know more about you than you might imagine. Not just because you returned that suitcase, but also because I've learned about your life. I know things haven't been easy for you, and I deeply admire the strength you've shown." His words resonated with Helen. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, unsure if she should feel flattered or uneasy. "What do you mean you know about my life?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Robert smiled slightly. "I'm a businessman, Helen. When something as valuable as that suitcase goes missing, I need to know who found it. I did some research. I know you care for your mother, work tirelessly to get by, and have never had a real opportunity to change your circumstances. Until now." Helen sat in silence for a moment, absorbing what he said. The word opportunity felt strange to her, like something distant and unreachable. "What exactly are you offering me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Robert leaned back in his chair as if he'd been waiting for that question. "Helen, I own several companies, but one of them is a philanthropic foundation, and I need someone trustworthy to manage a new branch we're opening here in the city. I want to offer you that position." Helen's eyes widened, unable to believe what she had just heard. "Manage a branch? But I don't have any experience. I wouldn't even know where to start." Her mind raced in every direction. How could she, a simple waitress, take on such an important role? Robert smiled again, this time with more patience. "I know you don't have experience, but what you do have is something far more rare: integrity, and that's what I value most. We can train you, provide you with the support you need, but the honesty you've shown, well, that can't be taught. That's why I chose you." Helen could barely process what he was saying. A million questions flooded her mind all at once. Why was he doing this for her? Could something this good really be true? And what if she failed? "I don't know if I can do it, Robert," she whispered. "It's a lot of responsibility. I wouldn't even know where to begin." He looked at her calmly, his voice low and encouraging. "We all start somewhere, Helen. I didn't know what I was doing when I started my first business either, but I learned over time, and you will too. The only thing I need from you right now is the willingness to try." Those words echoed in Helen's mind. The willingness to try. It was something she had always had, despite all the difficulties. Life had toughened her, but it hadn't broken her will to keep fighting. Maybe, just maybe, this was exactly what she needed. Even with the fear and uncertainty she felt, there was something inside her that wanted to believe this opportunity could change everything. "Why me?" Helen asked, still struggling to fully comprehend what was happening. Robert observed her for a moment, as if carefully choosing his next words. "Because you proved to me that there are still people in this world who do the right thing, even when no one is watching. And that's exactly what my foundation needs. People who care about others, who are willing to help without expecting anything in return. Most people wouldn't have returned that suitcase, but you did. That says a lot about who you are." Helen felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she held them back. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. For so many years, she had felt invisible, as if her struggles and sacrifices went unnoticed. But now, sitting in front of this man, she felt as though, for the first time, someone was truly seeing her for who she was. I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Say you'll accept the challenge," Robert replied with a soft smile. "That's all I need to hear." Helen sat in silence for a few moments, feeling the weight of the decision she was about to make. She knew that accepting this offer would mean completely changing her life, leaving her comfort zone, facing new challenges, taking risks, but she also knew it was an opportunity she might never get again. She looked at Robert and, with a deep breath, said, "I accept." Robert's smile widened. "I knew you would. Now let's move to the next step. Over the next few months, you'll undergo intensive training. I'll introduce you to the people who work with the foundation, and they'll teach you everything you need to know. And when you're ready, the branch will be yours to manage." Helen could hardly believe what was happening. She, a young woman who had never had a real opportunity in life, was about to become the manager of a foundation branch. It felt surreal. She felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She knew she was standing at the threshold of something that could change her life forever, but she also knew she would have to work harder than ever before. "I'll do my best," she said, her voice filled with determination. Robert nodded, satisfied with her response. "I expect nothing less, Helen. Now, go home, rest. Tomorrow, your new journey begins." As she left Robert's office, Helen felt as though she were floating. It was as if reality had become slightly distorted, like everything she had just experienced was a dream she hadn't yet woken up from. She walked through the streets of the city with a light heart, something she hadn't felt in a long time. When she got home, she found her mother sitting at the table, mending an old blouse. "How did it go?" she asked without looking up from her work. Helen approached her, pulled up a chair, and sat down next to her mother. "He offered me a job, Mom. A real job." Donna Claudia finally looked at her daughter, surprised. "A job? What kind of job?" Helen smiled, still in disbelief about what she was about to say. "He wants me to manage a foundation. I'll go through training, and then I'll be responsible for a branch right here in the city." Donna Claudia's eyes filled with tears. "My daughter, that's wonderful. I always knew you were special, that something good was waiting for you." Helen took her mother's hand, feeling the warmth and love in every word she said. "I just hope I'm up to it, Mom. It's a lot of responsibility." Donna Claudia squeezed her daughter's hand tightly. "You've always been up to it, Helen. Always." That night, Helen went to bed with her heart full of hope. For the first time in many years, she felt that life might finally be giving her a chance to be happy, to achieve something she had never thought possible. And deep down in her soul, she knew she was ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, Helen woke up with a strange feeling. It wasn't the same exhaustion she had grown used to feeling every morning as she faced another long day of work at the cafe. This time, there was a mixture of anxiety, nervousness, and most of all, hope. It felt like a new door had opened, and she was about to walk through it, unsure of what awaited on the other side. She got ready quickly, kissing her mother on the forehead before leaving. Donna Claudia, always observant, noticed the sparkle in her daughter's eyes. "Everything is going to be just fine, Helen. I know it," she said in her soft, encouraging voice. Helen smiled back, still feeling the weight of the responsibility she had taken on, but determined to do her best. The walk to Robert's building now felt familiar, but it carried a new sense of purpose. When she arrived at the foundation, she was greeted by a team of smiling, welcoming people. The atmosphere was completely different from what she was used to. Instead of the clatter of dishes and the hum of the cafe, this place was calm, bright, with an air of seriousness yet warmth. Here, Helen felt she wasn't just at any ordinary job. She was part of something bigger, something that was truly making a difference in people's lives. Robert introduced her to his team, who welcomed her with enthusiasm. "Helen, this is the team that will guide you through your training," he said, introducing a group of people who were clearly experts in what they did. There was Carlos, an experienced man who coordinated the foundation's resource distribution projects. Maria, responsible for managing relationships with the families the foundation supported, and Julia, who handled logistics and daily operations. Each of them was friendly and eager to teach Helen everything she needed to know. Training started that very day. They showed Helen how the foundation worked, what its goals were, and how each part of the process was essential in ensuring that donations reached those who needed them most. The foundation specialized in helping families in extreme situations, distributing food, clothing, and providing financial and medical assistance. Helen was amazed at the scale of the operation. She had never imagined something so big was happening so close to where she lived, and now, suddenly, she was part of it. Over the next few weeks, Helen dove deeply into the learning process. At first, she felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information and the weight of the responsibilities on her shoulders. There were moments when she doubted herself, wondering if she was truly capable of handling it all. However, with each passing day, she began to feel more confident, more prepared for the role she was stepping into. She realized that, despite her lack of prior experience, her dedication, willingness to learn, and most importantly, her compassion for people, helped her overcome each challenge. The most defining moment for Helen came when she finally had the chance to meet some of the families the foundation helped. The first visit was to a community living in dire conditions on the outskirts of the city. Helen and the team brought food, clothes, and medicine for those families. When they arrived, they were met with looks of gratitude and joy. Seeing these people's reality up close was a shock for Helen, but at the same time, it was transformative. It was as if something inside her had awakened. She knew what it was like to live with very little, but standing before these families, she realized their struggles were even greater than hers, and that touched her deeply. One of the women in the community, named Anna, approached Helen with tears in her eyes. She was holding a bag of food she had just received. "Thank you, truly. I don't know how I would have fed my children this week if it weren't for you," Anna said, her voice choked with emotion. Moved, Helen replied simply but sincerely, "We're here to help. You're not alone." Those words stayed with Helen for the rest of the day. She knew from that moment on that her work at the foundation wasn't just a job. It was a mission. As she walked home that night, Helen reflected on everything she had experienced. It was incredible how much her life had changed in just a few short weeks. From a waitress spending long days serving tables, she was now part of something much larger, helping to change lives. And more than that, she felt like her own life was being transformed. For the first time, she felt like she was in the right place, doing the right thing. But at the same time, Helen knew this was only the beginning. She was just at the start of a long journey. The training was far from over, and the challenge of managing an entire branch was drawing nearer. Though part of her still feared the future, another part of her had finally begun to believe that she could do this, and this newfound confidence was something she had never experienced before. When she got home, Donna Claudia was waiting for her, as always, with a warm smile. "How was your day?" she asked, eager to hear the latest. Helen sat down beside her mother, letting out a deep sigh. "It was amazing, Mom. We helped so many people. It's hard to explain. I've never felt this way before." Donna Claudia looked at her daughter with pride. "You were always capable of great things, Helen. You just needed a chance to show it, and now you have that chance." Helen knew the journey ahead would be long, but now, more than ever, she was determined to keep moving forward. What had begun as a simple act of honesty in returning a suitcase full of money had now become the foundation for a new life, one she had never imagined she could have. And as she looked toward the future, Helen realized that for the first time in a long time, she was truly excited for what was to come. Helen had been fully immersed in her work at the foundation for a few months now. In that time, she had learned more than she ever imagined possible. Every day, she felt more prepared to take on the responsibility Robert had entrusted to her. Meeting the families the foundation helped didn't just change her perspective on the world, it also changed her view of herself. For the first time, she felt capable, confident, and above all, fulfilled. But the path wasn't easy. There were nights when she came home exhausted, her mind overwhelmed from everything she was learning. Still, each challenge was met with the gratitude of the people who relied on her work, making it all worth it. One day, after a particularly intense week of visits and training, Robert called her in for a meeting. His voice was calm but serious, and Helen wasn't sure what to expect. As she entered the office, she sensed that something was different. Robert was sitting at his desk, looking thoughtful. As she approached, he gestured for her to sit down. "We have a lot to talk about today, Helen," Robert said bluntly. She felt a slight tension in the air, but took a deep breath, ready for whatever came next. "You've been doing very well. Better than I expected, to be honest," he continued, and Helen felt immediate relief. "But before we move forward, there's something I haven't told you yet." Robert paused. Watching Helen's reaction, she furrowed her brow slightly, unsure of where he was going with this. "That money you found, the suitcase, it was part of a test." Robert's words echoed in Helen's mind. She blinked, confused, trying to grasp what he was saying. "A test?" she repeated, still not fully believing it. Robert nodded. "Yes, a test. I put that suitcase there on purpose. I wanted to see if there were still honest people in the world. Over time, I lost some of my faith in people. I've seen so much dishonesty, even from those close to me, that I started to doubt. But I needed proof. Proof that there are still people worth believing in." Helen was stunned. Her mind raced in all directions. She had returned that money out of principle, never imagining that it had all been planned. "Are you saying that this whole time, this was a test for me?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Robert smiled, but it was a soft, almost melancholy smile. "It wasn't just a test for you, Helen. It was a test for me, too. I needed to see if I could still trust someone." For a moment, Helen didn't know how to feel. Part of her felt manipulated, as though she had been deceived. But at the same time, she couldn't deny that everything that had happened since then had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. So, all of this, the job offer, the foundation, was it part of that test? She asked, trying to sort through her thoughts. Robert shook his head. "No. What happened afterward was real. I offered you the position because I saw something in you. I saw that honesty wasn't just a one-time act. It's who you are, and that's exactly what I need in my foundation." Helen was still processing the revelation when Robert continued. "Now that you know everything, the decision is yours. If you want to continue, the job is yours. But if you feel like you can't trust me anymore, I'll understand. Either way, you've already passed the test, Helen. And for me, that means more than anything." Helen sat in silence for a long moment, reflecting on everything she had just learned. She felt a mix of emotions, surprise, confusion, but also a sense of clarity. She looked at Robert, trying to see beyond the businessman sitting in front of her. Yes, he had set up a situation to test her honesty, but in the end, that wasn't what truly mattered. What mattered was everything that came after. The real impact she had made on people's lives. How much her own life had changed, and most importantly, how much she had grown as a person. Helen exhaled deeply, letting the air escape slowly. "I won't lie, Robert. I was shocked by what you told me. But I can't ignore everything that's happened since then. This job, the foundation, the people I've helped, it's all real to me, and I want to keep doing it." Robert smiled, this time with warmth. "I'm glad to hear that, Helen. The truth is, out of all the people who could have found that suitcase, you were the one I needed most." Helen smiled back, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. Maybe it had all started as a test, but what she had gained from it was far more valuable than any amount of money. She had discovered her own worth, her ability to make a difference in the world around her, and, above all, she had discovered that despite all the hardships, there was still room for kindness and honesty. That night, as she walked home, Helen reflected on how much her life had changed over the past few months. The journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge she had faced made her stronger, more determined. When she walked through the door, she was greeted by her mother's warm smile. "So, how was your day?" asked Donna Claudia with that ever-attentive, curious look. Helen sat beside her, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. "It was enlightening," she said, laughing softly. "But in the end, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Donna Claudia took her daughter's hand, offering silent strength. I always knew you'd find your path, Helen. It just took a little time for it to find you." In the days that followed, Helen continued her work at the foundation with a new perspective. She knew now that she had been tested, but instead of feeling used, she felt grateful for having gone through it all, because it was through that test that she had found her true calling. And over time, she not only became a capable manager, but also a respected leader. Someone people turned to when they needed support or inspiration. And deep in her heart, Helen knew that it all started with a simple choice. The choice to do what was right, even when no one was watching. That suitcase full of money could have changed her life in many ways. But what really transformed her life was the decision to return it. Because, in the end, the true reward of honesty wasn't the money or the job she earned. The true reward was discovering who she really was. After Robert's revelation about the test, Helen dove even deeper into her work at the foundation. The feeling of finally doing something meaningful filled her heart with gratitude, but also a profound sense of responsibility. Now she understood that her position wasn't due to luck or chance. She had been chosen, yes, but it was her honesty and determination that kept her there. Deep down, this certainty made Helen feel more capable than ever before. The workdays at the foundation grew even more intense. Now, with Robert's complete trust, Helen began taking on larger responsibilities. With every new project, she became directly involved, organizing visits to impoverished communities, structuring new ways to distribute resources, and most importantly, ensuring that donations reached those who truly needed them. One morning, Helen was called into Robert's office again. She didn't know why, but after months of working by his side, she had learned to fully trust his intentions. As she entered, she noticed that Robert seemed more serious than usual. "Helen, I need to talk to you about something important," he began, gesturing for her to take a seat. "I've been thinking about expanding the foundation. There are so many regions that need our help, and it's time to bring the work we're doing here to other places," he explained. "I need someone to lead this expansion project, someone I trust completely to continue what we've started." Robert paused and looked directly into Helen's eyes. "And I want you to be that person." Helen was stunned. Despite having dedicated herself intensely to the work, she never imagined she would be asked to lead such a grand project. "Me?" she asked, almost in disbelief. "Robert, I don't know if I'm ready for something this big." But Robert smiled, the kind of smile that calms and reassures. "Helen, you've already proven that you're more than capable. It's not about being ready, you already are. What you've done for this foundation so far has been extraordinary, and I know you'll do even more. I just need you to believe in yourself as much as I believe in you." Helen took a deep breath, trying to absorb the magnitude of what Robert was proposing. Expanding the foundation meant bringing resources and assistance to places that had never been reached before. She thought about all the families she had met over the past few months, the children who depended on the donations, the mothers who had thanked her with tears in their eyes for a simple act of compassion. She knew that by accepting this offer, she could make a difference in the lives of so many others. Still, her insecurities crept in. Helen thought about her mother and how her entire life up to that point had been dedicated to caring for her. Even though Donna Claudia's health was stable, the idea of being away for long periods and taking on such a demanding role weighed heavily on her mind. "And my mother?" she asked, hesitantly. "She depends on me so much. If I take on this new role, I'll have to travel and be away for long stretches of time." Robert, always perceptive, seemed to have anticipated this concern. "I understand how important your mother is to you, Helen. That won't change. We'll make sure she has all the care she needs. We'll do everything to ensure you can travel with peace of mind, knowing she's well taken care of. And whenever possible, you'll be able to come back and spend as much time as you need with her. I don't want you to choose between your work and your family. I want you to have both." Robert's words brought Helen a sense of relief. Knowing that her mother would be well looked after eased her worries, but the decision was still difficult. On one hand, she knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, something that could transform not only her life, but the lives of countless others. On the other hand, the fear of failing, of not being up to the responsibility, continued to haunt her. However, as she looked at Robert, she realized he believed in her in a way no one ever had before. And suddenly, Helen felt something new. Confidence. She didn't know where this newfound strength was coming from, but it was there, growing inside her. Maybe it was the months of hard work, the lessons learned, the experiences that had shaped her. Or maybe it was simply the right moment. She knew that if she had learned anything throughout her journey, it was that opportunities rarely came twice. And this was one she couldn't let slip by. "I accept," Helen said firmly. "I'll lead the expansion project." Robert smiled broadly, clearly pleased with her response. "I knew you would," he replied. "Let's start the preparations immediately. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but I know you're ready." In the following months, Helen's life changed drastically. The training was now focused on preparing her to handle the complexities of managing multiple branches of the foundation in different regions. She traveled to other cities, learning about the realities of each location, understanding the specific needs of each community. With every new trip, Helen was more and more amazed at how necessary the foundation's work was. And with every new challenge, she felt herself growing stronger and more capable. However, not everything was easy. There were moments of exhaustion when Helen questioned whether she had made the right decision. Sometimes the obstacles felt insurmountable. There was bureaucracy, a lack of resources, and even resistance from some communities that weren't ready to accept help. Helen had to learn to deal with frustration, make tough decisions, and persevere, even when everything seemed to be against her. But even in the hardest moments, Helen always remembered why she was there. Every time she saw a child's face light up when they received a meal or heard a mother's words of gratitude for a new opportunity, she knew it was all worth it. And slowly, but surely, the expansion project began to take shape. Back in her hometown, Helen also had a surprise. Donna Claudia, who had been receiving proper medical care and constant support, seemed healthier than ever. "I've never felt this good, Helen," she said one evening as they sat together in the living room. "And that's because you're finally doing what you were always meant to do. I'm so proud of you, my daughter." Those words warmed Helen's heart. She knew that, no matter how difficult it had been, she was on the right path. The transformation she was going through was proof of that. From a simple waitress in a small town, Helen had become a leader, someone who was making a difference in the world. As time passed, the new branches of the foundation began operating in various cities. Helen now coordinated a team of hundreds, all dedicated to the same mission, helping those who needed it most. With every new achievement, Helen realized she was accomplishing more than she had ever thought possible. In the end, Helen understood that just as Robert had trusted in her, she needed to trust in herself. The path she had walked was long and full of obstacles, but it was the very path that had led her to become the person she had always wanted to be. Someone who, despite all the difficulties, never gave up. As the months passed, Helen solidified her role as a respected leader within the foundation. The expansion project had reached multiple cities, and the impact of the foundation's work on people's lives was immeasurable. Helen, now at the helm of a grand operation, was accomplishing what once seemed like a distant dream. Yet, through it all, she never forgot that it all began with a simple choice. The moment she decided to return that suitcase full of money. Despite the ever-changing demands of her life, Helen kept one thing constant: her connection to people. She never allowed the success or new responsibilities to distance her from the reason she started: the genuine desire to help those in need. And above all, her love for her mother remained the center of her world. Donna Claudia, with her health steadily improving, watched her daughter's journey with pride. "I always knew you'd do something extraordinary, Helen," she said one quiet afternoon while they sipped tea together. "You've always had that glow inside you. It was only a matter of time before it illuminated the world." Those words filled Helen's heart with joy and gratitude. Each day, she felt more connected to the Foundation's mission, knowing she was part of something that went far beyond her own life. And even during the most challenging moments, the memory of her early struggles kept her grounded. She remembered all the nights she came home exhausted from work, the piles of unpaid bills, the constant worry over her mother's health. Now, all of that felt distant, yet it remained a part of who she was. One day, while reviewing reports from one of the new branches, Helen was surprised by an unexpected visit. Robert walked into her office wearing a soft smile and holding a small box in his hands. "I have something for you," he said, handing the box to Helen. She looked at him, puzzled, but carefully opened the gift. Inside was a metal plaque engraved with the words, "In recognition of the integrity and dedication of Helen Almeida for her tireless work in transforming lives and inspiring a better future." Helen was silent for a moment, her eyes welling up with tears. She hadn't expected to be honored in such a special way. "Robert, I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice trembling with emotion. Robert, smiling warmly, replied, "You don't need to say anything. Just know that your work here is more valuable than you might realize. Not many would have done what you did, Helen. And I'm not just talking about the suitcase. I'm talking about how you've embraced the Foundation's mission and made this cause your own." Helen took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. She understood the importance of recognition. But for her, the greatest reward was seeing the lives she had helped change. "I just did what I thought was right," she said, her voice still soft. "And in the end, I was rewarded in ways I never imagined." That night, Helen went home feeling fulfilled once again. She knew her journey was far from over. There would always be more people to help, more communities to reach, more challenges to overcome. But no matter how uncertain the road ahead might be, she knew one thing for sure. She was exactly where she was meant to be, doing what she was born to do. A few months later, during a large ceremony organized by the Foundation, Helen was invited to give a speech about her work and the importance of what they were accomplishing. In the audience were Foundation members, collaborators, donors, and, most importantly, the people who had benefited from the project. When she stepped onto the stage, she felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about her, it was about all the lives that had crossed her path, about the impact each act of kindness could have. With the microphone in hand, Helen began to speak, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm here today because at a certain point in my life, I made a choice. A simple choice, but one that changed everything. I decided to return something that wasn't mine. And by doing so, I didn't just return a suitcase full of money. I regained something within myself that I didn't even know I had lost. Faith in people and faith in myself." The audience was silent, hanging on her every word. "What I've learned along this journey," she continued, "is that the decisions we make, no matter how small they may seem, can have an immense impact on our lives and the lives of others. We all have the power to do good. And when we do, we don't just change the world around us, we change ourselves too." She paused, scanning the room, her eyes shining with the emotion of the moment. "If I could say something to the Helen from years ago, who was lost and struggling to survive, it would be this. Keep believing, keep doing what's right, even when no one is watching, because in the end, that will lead you exactly where you need to be." Applause filled the auditorium, and Helen felt warmth spread through her chest. In that moment, she was no longer the young woman who had found a suitcase full of money and wrestled with her own uncertainties. She was now a woman who had found her mission and her purpose. And that, more than anything else, was the true reward. In the days following the ceremony, Helen continued her work, leading the Foundation's expansion with tireless dedication. With each new achievement, she remembered her mother's words, that she had always been capable of great things. Donna Claudia, now fully recovered and stronger than ever, was Helen's greatest inspiration, the living proof that love and perseverance could overcome any obstacle. As time went on, Helen's story began to spread. She became an example of how small acts of honesty and kindness can lead to great transformations. And even when no one was watching, Helen knew that every choice she had made had shaped her into the person she was today. Helen had transformed her own life, and in doing so, she had also transformed the lives of many others. In the end, the true wealth she found wasn't in the suitcase she returned, but in the human connections she built, the impact her work had, and the love that always guided her choices. And so, Helen left behind a legacy, not of money, nor of power, but of compassion, honesty, and the proof that even in the hardest situations, it's always worth doing what's right.